let's get into our running back start sits for week 13.
It's huge.
We got 5 names on here. Some are a little bit more chalk. Some are some deeper names. And the first one I want to start with is a guy that before we hit record here, I was just blown away looking at some of the stats. RB13 on the year in PPR is Nyheim Hines. And I feel like just saying that alone should mean that you have to start him this week. But
it's crazy. Why does he feel like one of these flex guys? You blew my mind with that because he feels like someone you can never trust. Yet he is RB, what did you say, 14 on the season?
13. And what that's come from is he's had these 30-point outings now multiple times over the season. And then if he's not giving you 30 points, he's giving you somewhere like 6 to 12. So he has been a little bit more boom bust, especially for a running back. Typically, they're a little bit less boom bust than wide receivers. Nyheim Hines is almost like a boom bust wide receiver play at this point. But he is a guy that I'm willing to flex and willing to plug into my RB2 spot if I need him there, just because he has shown that he has that pop potential, has that matchup against the Houston Texans this week, which are 31st, second to last against running backs. I think Hines is going to eat.
Yeah, I'm starting Hines this week.
And there's always potential where he gets hot-handed out, where maybe it's a Jonathan Taylor game or a Jordan Wilkins game. You have to know that that's part of it. But you still have to, I think, start him because if he puts up 30 points on your bench, you're going to be pissed.
Yeah, and he's developed a little bit of a floor now. I know he's been under 10 PPR fantasy points this year, more than he's been over it. But when he's under, I mean, he's at 7 points, 8 points. It's not good. I'm not saying that's good by any means, but he's only really crushed you 1 or 2 times, and the trend is definitely pointing up for Nyheim Hines. Now, as a Colts fan, I've watched every single game, and Nyheim Hines just feels like a player that they're trusting more and more and more. He's really starting to see a bigger snap share. There's word on the street that Jordan Wilkins is dealing with being a little bit nicked up as well, so maybe Hines steps into those snaps with Jonathan Taylor presumed to return this week. But Phillip Rivers, we said it going into the year. You called it going into the year. Phillip Rivers checks down to the running back. We've seen it with Jonathan Taylor. We've seen it with Jordan Wilkins, guys that don't catch passes. And here we are with Nyheim Hines. We shouldn't be surprised that he's thriving with a quarterback with the tendencies of Phillip Rivers in this offense. It fits his skill set perfectly. This is a matchup against Houston where I expect points to be put up on the board. We've seen the Colts defense really bend here over the past couple of weeks. I know this past week against Tennessee, they got lit up. No DeForest Buckner, a couple other guys out. So I'm not counting that against them too much, but they haven't been as dominant as they were in those first several games of the season. So I think Houston can still put up points. I think the Colts will need to throw the ball in some capacity, and Nyheim Hines could be a good lock for 4 or 5 targets and a handful of carries in this game. And if he finds the end zone, you're really happy. So fire him up. I'm starting Nyheim Hines in week 13.
One thing that's really changed in my process going into 2021 and beyond is looking at quarterback tendencies a little bit more than just player production in college or what they put up combine wise or what they've even done in the league, but it's looking at those tendencies. And we looked at like Teddy Bridgewater. We should have known Teddy Bridgewater always checks down to the running back. He did it in Minnesota, he did it in New Orleans, and now he's doing it in Carolina. We've seen Mike Davis have a great real season for a guy who's a backup running back behind a full-time workhorse in Christian McCaffrey, but even Christian McCaffrey has had multiple double-digit target gains from Teddy Bridgewater. Even Gardner Minshew was a guy who had the tendency to check down to the running back. We saw that with Leonard Fournette putting up over 100 targets in 2019. We should have extrapolated that out onto James Robinson, but sometimes we just get a little bit too caught up in that and the players themselves. Throw Drew Brees into that mix. He's right there with Phillip Rivers as these, veteran, some of the best in the league, throwing behind the line of scrimmage. So just something I wanted to throw out there. How I'm changing my process over time is looking a little bit more at these running back target tendencies of these QBs. Let's move over to the next start-sit question here. A guy that is as disgusting as it is to say, I think I'm willing to plug him in if I need him, and it's Frank Gore against the Vegas Raiders. This doesn't excite me at all. This is disgusting. I'm almost ashamed to be talking about this right now and admitting that I'm willing to start 37-year-old Frank Gore in Week 13 of the 2020 NFL season.
Here's the thing. This is a total roster-dependent move. If you're looking at your matchup and you're like, holy smokes, I'm going against a team that's a juggernaut. I need my RBs to pop. Frank Gore is not getting you that big week. He's just not going to do it. But if you're looking at your opponent, you're like, dang, this is one of the bottom feeders of the league. I just need to secure this win to get into the playoffs or get that bye week or whatever. And I just need 8 to 10 points. I need 10 points out of my RB2. I think Frank Gore is just about a lock for that 8 to 10 points. I think he does get above that 10 number because he's just getting the touches. I mean, his last 2 games without Michael Pirine, 15 carries and 18 carries, 2 catches and 3 catches in those 2 games. It's not efficient work. The touchdown upside is low, but if he gets 15 carries for, 60 yards, 15 carries for 50 yards, and he can add a couple of catches as well, and maybe he falls into the end zone for the Jets' 1 touchdown of the week, you got yourself a pretty solid RB2 performance. So I'm not trying to start Gore, but if you just need that really safe baseline, I think you can plug him in.
I think he is safe for double-digit fantasy points this week. Has a super high floor. And when you compare him to other names that we're going to talk about here as we move down this list, I think you're starting him over a lot of these guys. And one of those, at least to me, is Cam Akers. Cam Akers had a great game in Week 12. Only 27% of snaps, but was hyper efficient, scored a touchdown, had 84 yards on just 9 carries. It's a 9.3 yard per attempt from Cam Akers. We saw the breakaway play. We're starting to see some efficiency there. I think this is a great takeaway for Cam Akers investors in Dynasty, but I'm not ready to start Cam Akers yet when he's only playing, he's playing less than 30% of snaps. You just can't trust that in your fantasy football.
I'm actually shocked to hear that. I watched that game, and it felt like he was out there more because the only productive plays they were getting from the running back position were from Cam Akers. But I'm with you. Back-to-back weeks with touchdowns, really good to see him performing at a high level and being efficient. But you just can't start him yet. You just can't do it. There's a 3-headed backfield there, and I think unless one or both of Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson go down, it's just going to be too dicey to rely on Cam Akers. So, if he continues to break out and continues to emerge and get better and better every week, keep him on your bench, and maybe by the playoffs, he's someone you're willing to start. But for now, I'm leaving him on my bench. I'd rather start Frank Gore, which sounds crazy to say.
Yep, I'm with you. And the next 2 weeks are some rough matchups, Arizona, New England, and then after that has the Jets and the Seahawks. So definitely a guy you should keep on your bench. Maybe he could explode in these easy matchups down the stretch. We know injuries are happening at all-time high levels this season. He's definitely a depth piece at the running back position that you want to have on a roster. Let's talk about another running back here, James White, who's coming off back-to-back 14 fantasy point performances in PPR leagues. In both games has seen just 5 carries, but ended up having 2 touchdowns against Arizona, only 1 target. James White has really been, I'm not even going to say boom bust. He's been high floor or bust. He's been a bust or bust, honestly, but he's had some good games the last 2 weeks. If you're riding this hot hand, if he's on your roster in a matchup against the Chargers, which are a beatable defense, are you willing to plug James White in there again? As maybe a wide receiver a run RB2 or a flex?
Yeah, I am. I mean, the Patriots have a historically slow pace of play this year, and that's definitely contributed to the low output of their offense, but they're also not getting anywhere. And you think about this backfield, you have Damon Harris, you have Cam Newton who runs the ball, you had Rex Burkhead, Sony Michel is going to be back in the mix as well, and James White. And it's just a total crowded mix of guys you want to stay away from. But since Rex Burkhead has gone out with that injury, James White has essentially become James White plus Rex Burkhead. You look at those past 2 games, very, very, very small sample size. But over the past 2 weeks, James White's been productive. RB8 over the past 2 weeks. I know you can't take a lot away from that because it is such a small sample size, but it's encouraging. Encouraging enough to where I'd be willing to start him because the receiving work is there. And in a game against the Los Angeles Chargers, who are one of these teams that's associated with shootouts, it feels like each and every week with Justin Herbert slinging the ball, one of the fastest paces of play in the league. It's like fire meets ice. So I expect there to be a decent amount of volume in this game. If Justin Herbert can put up points against a Patriots defense that's beatable, I think Cam Newton might have to throw the ball. We know he hasn't liked throwing it down the field this season, so James White is going to be the benefactor of that. So I'll lock in James White. I'll play James White over a lot of the guys we've talked about, over Cam Akers, over Frank Gore, and probably close to Nyheim Hines. I think Hines has a higher upside, but if you want floor, I like James White just fine.
I think you're a little bit higher on James White than I am. I'm trying not to start him if I can help it at all. Give me a guy like Chase Edmonds. Give me Nyheim Hines. Give me even J.D. McKissick over James White. I know it's gross to say, and James White has had those 2 pop weeks without Burkhead in the lineup. It's just we know the floor is like 3 points for James White. That, again, that could be said for a lot of running backs. That could even be said for Frank Gore. But I'm trying to look the other way. But you got two sides of the coin here, me and you. That's why we got both of us on this show. Let's talk about one more running back, more of a chalk name, Clyde EdwardsHelaire, coming off a pretty rough outing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, only 4.9 fantasy points. He did get a large majority of the snaps, 61% of snaps, had 11 carries for only 37 yards, did catch his one target for 2 yards. This was just a game script thing. We know Tampa Bay's a great run defense. I'm not surprised by this output, but we've talked about CEH before. He has to be a guy that you have to plug in every single week because of the upside. And just 2 weeks ago in Week 11 against Las Vegas, Clyde EdwardsHelaire gave you a 20-point fantasy outing. So the volume hasn't been tremendous, but the upside in this offense is what makes him a guy that, unfortunately, whether he puts up 5 points or 25 points, I think you have to fire him up every single week as a high-end RB2.
Yeah, I mean, he's a tough case. I think he's an RB2, but I think he's someone you have to play. He's just in this Chiefs offense. Anyone that's associated in the Chiefs offense and is getting significant touches is someone you have to pretty much plug into your lineup. So, Tyreek Hill and Kelsey are obvious. The next guy there getting significant touches is Clyde EdwardsHelaire, and at the running back position, 11 to 15 touches can be really valuable. And when it's in such a dynamic offense, there's always touchdown upside. This is a matchup against Denver. We all expect the Chiefs to win. Now, they could do what they did last week against Tampa Bay when they were up by 20 points, just keep throwing the ball. But I expect them to slow it down a little bit with the run in a game that they're going to control against the Broncos. And I think CH is a good start.
Believe it or not, that Chiefs-Broncos game has the second highest over-under on the week at 50.5 points. I think that's assuming that Drew Lock is going to be back under center for the Broncos. Shout out to Kendall Hinton. Let's talk about wide
receivers. It was a great try.
It was.